keep talking. Someone post the link. Someone post the link in the other chat. My goodness, my goodness. Here we are. We're not going anywhere. We're just going to keep going. YouTube is very mysterious like that. The stream just dies very mysteriously. Someone post the link in the other chat. We're just going to keep going here. Just going to keep going here. So anyhow, as I was saying, please post the link in the old chat. As I was saying, the World Anti-Communist League, WACL, the World Anti-Communist League was involved in raising money for the Contras and smuggling weapons into Nicaragua, helping with their drug dealing throughout the world. The Contras became dependent on the apparatus created by the government on Taiwan called the World Anti-Communist League. And as the war continued, now we know what happened later in the 1980s. People may be familiar with the Iran-Contra affair. That was when U.S. President Ronald Reagan wanted to keep giving guns and weapons to the Contras. He wanted to keep arming the Contra terrorists. He wanted to keep arming them. However, it was illegal to do so. So he had Oliver North, his military leader, he had Oliver North sell missiles to Iran and use the proceeds to fund the Contras of Nicaragua. And that was a blatant violation of U.S. law, and it was a huge scandal in the 1980s. What do you call it? The name of it was the Iran-Contra affair, where Ronald Reagan had been, raising money and selling missiles to Iran and giving the money to the Contras behind the backs of the U.S. Congress, which had outlawed the funding of the Contras. It was a very famous incident. There were congressional investigations in particular. So that happened. So the whole time, even though it was illegal under U.S. law, even though it was illegal under U.S. law to arm the Contra terrorists, even though it was illegal, regardless of the fact that it was illegal, you had the U.S. government funding the terrorists, and you had the World Anti-Communist League, based in Taiwan, funding the Contra terrorists. Well, in 1990, they had an election in Nicaragua. They had an election, and the U.S. government basically told the people of Nicaragua, you've had over 10 years of war at this point. And that's true. I mean, hundreds of thousands of people had died. A horrendous civil war was happening in the country. People were dying. And in response to that, the U.S. government basically said to the people of Nicaragua, if you vote the Sandinistas out of power, we will stop killing you. That was what it was. I mean, the way the election was held in 1990 was the U.S. government basically told the people of Nicaragua, if you will vote out the Sandinistas, you vote the Liberal Party in, you vote the anti-communists into office, we will stop murdering you. Right? It was election at the point of a gun, election at the point of landmines. It was not a fair vote, right? I mean, because, I agree. Thank you. I'm doing my best here. Just going to keep going. But anyway, it was not a fair vote, all right? Not a fair vote by any means. And in 1990, the people of Nicaragua, faced with the choice of the war continuing and the USA continuing to bomb and destroy and terrorize their country, or the USA promised, if you vote for the other party, we'll stop murdering you. And the Soviet Union was having big problems and beginning to fall, and the world communist resistance to U.S. imperialism was getting weaker, right? The Soviet Union was about to fall. A lot of Eastern European governments were falling. So in response to that, the people of Nicaragua voted out the Sandinista Party. The Sandinista Party was voted out of office, and the anti-communists took over Nicaragua in 1990. Now, the Sandinistas maintained a huge base of support among the population. There were still huge labor unions that supported the Sandinistas. There were still huge community organizations that supported the Sandinistas, religious groups that supported the Sandinistas. The Sandinistas still had a massive amount of support in the country, but they lost the elections. So, after the Sandinistas lost the elections, the new government that came in, which had been funded by the World Anti-Communist League, the new government that came in in 1994 withdrew recognition from the People's Republic of China and instead granted recognition to the government on Taiwan. And it was a way to do a favor to the World Anti-Communist League, right? One of the main supporters of the right-wing opposition in Nicaragua had been the World Anti-Communist League, funded by the government of Taiwan, based on the government on Taiwan. So, to do a favor to the government on Taiwan, to thank them for helping bring down the Sandinistas, the right-wing regime in Nicaragua in 1994 granted recognition to the government on Taiwan. Now, there are only now there's only 7 countries in the world that recognize the government on Taiwan. Most of the world recognizes the People's Republic of China as being the only Chinese government, one China, etc. The United States recognized the government on Taiwan until Richard Nixon. I believe it was Carter who finally established diplomatic relations with the People's Republic. Jimmy Carter finally established formal diplomatic relations in 1979, but under the Nixon administration, he had Henry Kissinger coming out and making statements about Taiwan, etc. So we have a situation now where Nicaragua in the 1990s, with its right-wing government, recognized the government on Taiwan. But then what happened? What happened next? Well, next, you had a situation where things in Nicaragua continued to get worse. Poverty was rising, unemployment was rising, things were getting worse and worse and worse. And the free market regime in Nicaragua was impoverishing the people, and it was a disaster. But then, fast forward to 2006. In 2006, the Sandinistas were able to get back into power. The people of Nicaragua changed their minds. They were tired of the free market regime, and they voted the Sandinistas back into office. Daniel Ortega, who'd been the president under the Sandinistas, was voted back to being the president of Nicaragua. Now, to be fair, Daniel Ortega's politics had changed quite a bit. He emphasized the need for people to be able to have their own small business. He emphasized his belief in international trade. That the policies that the Sandinistas advocated in the 1980s were similar to Cuba or the Soviet Union. They seemed to be advocating some kind of, Soviet-style socialism, a little bit different. There was a religious flavor to it. It was always uniquely Nicaraguan, but they were advocating more or less what was in vogue in the global communist movement at the time, which was Soviet-style policies. However, in 2006, they instead had shifted their program to be in line with Bolivarian socialism, and that they were admiring Hugo Chavez of Venezuela. They were admiring Evo Morales, who had just been elected in Bolivia. And the Sandinistas came back into office on a new program of advocating a mixed economy, they came back to power in 2006 and they got to work. And the Sandinistas, they came back to power in 2006. They got to work. When they came back to power in 2006, only 52% of the entire country of Nicaragua had electricity. However, today, as a result of the Sandinistas, 99% of the country is electrified. Even up in some of the most remote, mountainous regions, all the people have electricity. That is a huge development. They wiped out illiteracy in the country. They cut poverty in half. They've drastically reduced poverty. They've built very solid, smooth roads throughout the country. They have done amazing things to improve the living conditions of the people of Nicaragua. And the life expectancy has gone up. And they have a micro-entrepreneurship program. They've enabled hundreds of thousands of Nicaraguans to start their own businesses. They have established thousands of worker cooperative enterprises that are not state-run industries, but they're worker cooperatives. That's another program that the Sandinistas have set up. They've done just utterly amazing things to improve the lives of their people. It is amazing to see, and I was just there in November. Russell Brand. I was just there in November, and it was utterly amazing. And So, keep in mind that as they're building up the economy, as they're raising people out of poverty, they join the Bolivarian Alternative of Latin America, which is a bank, a development bank set up by the socialist government of Venezuela. It includes Cuba. It includes Bolivia. It's amazing what they're doing. Raising people out of poverty. The slogan of the government of Nicaragua: Christianity, socialism, and solidarity. When I got my COVID test in Nicaragua, I had to get a COVID test, and on my test results, beneath where it said negative, which because I didn't have COVID, on the bottom it said Cristiano Socialismo Solidaridad, right? Christianity, socialism, and solidarity. That's what the government of Nicaragua is fighting for. And you go to Nicaragua, they've done amazing things to improve people's lives. They provided housing to people. They've given the land to the people who live on the land, people who live on land and have lived on this land for thousands of years. They've been granted the deeds to the land that they live on. It's been utterly amazing, just utterly amazing what the government of Nicaragua has done for the population. And as they are presiding over building up this country economically, as they've done that, they are at the same time talking with the People's Republic of China. The People's Republic of China, which they don't have diplomatic relations with. They still had diplomatic relations with Taiwan. They're talking with them. And we know that as early as 2013, there started to be talk of building a new canal in Nicaragua. Because one of the ways that the United States dominates the global economy, one of the ways they do it is through the Panama Canal. The United States controls the Panama Canal, and that's a pretty vital route in terms of maritime dominance. The Panama Canal is very vital. If you want to, I suppose you can go all the way down to the southern cone, but it takes a lot longer. But if you want to go straight through the Americas, you need to go through the Panama Canal. Well, the government of Nicaragua, the socialist government, started talking with China about building a new canal that would counter the Panama Canal. And in doing so, it would grant more maritime freedom to countries around the world. Because the fact that the USA controls the Panama Canal gives the United States a huge amount of power in global trade. For example, there was a ship going from Cuba to North Korea a couple years ago. The USA searched it and determined that weapons were going to North Korea or something, and they prevented this delivery. Right? The USA, through control of the government of Panama, the Panama Canal, has a huge amount of power over global trade. At any point, the United States could just start telling various countries they can't go through the Panama Canal, and that would wreck their economies. But for the government of Nicaragua to build its own canal, that would grant a huge amount of economic independence, because suddenly there would be a way to go through Central America, go from the Atlantic to the Pacific. There would be a way to go from the Atlantic to the Pacific without the U.S. government having oversight. That would be a huge development. It would be huge. So, speed up to this year, as you all know, in November, I was in Nicaragua. I was there for the elections, and the people of Nicaragua voted the socialists, the Sandinistas, to remain in power. And yes, it was a fair election. The people that were barred from participating were not candidates. They were individuals who had broken the law, had been lobbying for sanctions against their own country, had been illegally getting funded by U.S.-backed NGOs without disclosing that, in some cases blatantly concealing it. And there was a violent attempt to overthrow the Nicaraguan government in 2018 that resulted in a large number of deaths. In 2018, there was street violence and a lot of people were killed. In the aftermath of that, there was an amnesty, and then there were a number of people that violated the amnesty that were then arrested for lobbying for sanctions against Nicaragua, for getting U.S. funds, for setting up troll farms in Nicaragua to spread fake news about the government funded by the United States, etc. A number of people were arrested for violating Nicaragua's laws. They weren't able to participate, but the Liberal Party did participate. There were 7 candidates on the ballot, And I was there. I saw how it was a fair election. They counted the votes in the same place the votes were cast. The people were able to participate. They did everything to incentivize participation in the elections. They had the election on a weekend. They had all kinds of polling places, no huge lines. It was a free and fair election in Nicaragua. They voted the Sandinistas back into power. However, the United States did not recognize the government, the election results in Nicaragua. The United States said that, oh no, this wasn't a real election, because various people they called pre-candidates, who were never candidates, but people that they thought might be, pre-candidates, people backed by the United States, were not able to participate. Because people backed by the United States were not participating in the election, they were prevented from, participating. It is alleged at that point, the United States didn't recognize the elections. Now, it's important to note one of the major parties in Nicaragua, one of the major opposition parties, made a point of filing their registration for the election days late, knowing that they would be barred, just so they could get up and say we're persecuted. They intentionally filed their paperwork late because they didn't really want to participate in the elections because they knew they wouldn't win. But regardless, so the United States doesn't recognize the results of Nicaragua's democratic election that happened at the beginning of November. I was there. It was a free and fair election. There was transparency, but the United States doesn't recognize it. So now, just a couple hours ago, the government of Nicaragua came forward and withdrew its recognition of the government on Taiwan and said there is only one China, the People's Republic of China. Huge. And what this means, folks, is that there's a very good chance the canal could be moving ahead. And that is huge. That is amazingly huge. You don't know how big that is. The canal that will be an alternative to the Panama Canal is moving ahead. And China and the government of Nicaragua, it appears, now that they have relations with each other, it appears now this plan to build this canal to counter the Panama Canal is moving ahead. The recognition of Taiwan that was created by the World Anti-Communist League, by Reverend Sun Myung Moon, by the government on Taiwan, that's done. That's over. However, of course the United States is furious about this. The United States doesn't recognize the election that just happened in Nicaragua. The United States doesn't want there to be an alternative to the Panama Canal. Oh no, they want dominance over the trade routes of the world, right? They want to be able to cut off, access for trade routes for countries that are independent. They want the ability to shut down China's economy, shut down the economy of different countries around the world by deciding who goes through the Panama Canal. That's why the United States maintains a military presence in the South China Sea, for the same reason. They want to be threatening to cut off China's oil supply. So now, with this development, we could very soon be seeing a new canal constructed through Central America. This is a very, very good development. It's a very good development. And what this will mean, if there is a new canal to counter the Panama Canal, this will mean a huge amount of economic investment into Nicaragua. Because, Panama, there's a lot in Panama because a lot of global trade has to go through the Panama Canal. This will mean that suddenly there will be a lot of global trade that will be going through Nicaragua. A lot of jobs in Nicaragua, building this canal, building the infrastructure that will be necessary to be part of the canal, building businesses to serve the needs of the people. This is huge. And if you look at the region, Central America is where this massive refugee crisis along the U.S. border is happening, right? All these people, that are piling into the United States. We talk about the kids in cages. They're coming from Honduras. They're coming from Guatemala because this region has been economically devastated. The lasting impact of U.S. wars in the region is massive. The U.S. government has been arming drug gangs and terrorists, and the body count of U.S. government atrocities in Central America is massive through arming the drug cartels, through waging covert wars against the government of Nicaragua, a brutal counterinsurgency in El Salvador. The USA backed the brutal dictatorship of Rios Montt in Guatemala. In 2009, Hillary Clinton and the Hillary Clinton State Department and the Obama administration toppled the government of Honduras. Now Honduras has the highest murder rate in the world. Just horrendous things. I mean, you want to talk about atrocities and body counts, when we're told that communism is bad, they always say, oh, it killed this many million. Well, there's millions, the millions and millions of people who have died as a result of U.S. policy in Central America. It's never discussed, but it's massive. Keeping these countries in chronic poverty, preventing them from having economic development, arming drug cartels, arming dictators like Rios Montt, the Contra terrorists. I mean, if you wanted to do a body count for U.S. Central American policy, it would be in the tens and hundreds of millions. There's no way to calculate it. And they never bother to do this. All these people who want to give us these numbers about communism, they never bother to calculate what has been the cost of keeping countries in poverty. In Honduras and Guatemala, there's whole regions where people still don't speak Spanish. They speak the indigenous language. They don't have running water. They don't have electricity. There were whole villages that were slaughtered, by Rios Montt, the dictator in Guatemala, by anti-communist forces in Honduras. Well, now with Nicaragua getting this huge boost with the canal, it looks like the canal is in the works. With China and Nicaragua now, establishing relations with each other, with the government on Taiwan being repudiated by Nicaragua. Now with the government of Honduras. It appears they've elected Xiomara Castro from the Libre Party, a socialist. They've elected a socialist president of Honduras, finally, after the 2009 coup d'etat backed by the United States, after a decade of terrorism and murder. It appears the people of Honduras have finally been allowed to elect a socialist. It appears that we could start to see economic development in Central America. This will be good for the people of Nicaragua. This will be good for the people of Honduras, good for the people of Guatemala. It will be good for the United States. This will be good for everybody. This is economic development. The road to peace is economic development. When people are poor, that's when they get involved in criminal gangs and drug dealer organizations. When people are poor, that's when they join terrorist groups. When people are impoverished, that's when authoritarian regimes are set up. But the road to freedom, democracy, peace, and stability is economic development. You've got to raise people out of poverty. You've got to get people access to running water and electricity and education, literacy. You don't fight terrorism with drones. You don't fight terrorism by invading countries and overthrowing them. You fight terrorism with schools, with hospitals, with jobs. That's what you do. China has had problems with separatist forces in Tibet, separatist forces in the Uyghur regions. And how did they solve these problems? Why is there so much stability in the Uyghur regions and in Tibet right now? Because China has poured jobs into the area. They've built highways. They've built new industries there. And by giving the people their jobs and education and healthcare and access to, the necessities of life and economic opportunity, those regions are now very stable. When's the last time you heard about a big, ugly terrorist attack in Tibet or rioting or violence in Tibet? You haven't, because China has poured so much economic development into Tibet that the people are happy and they don't need to join terrorist groups. They don't need to get involved in such activity. The Uyghur regions, right? Same thing. They've been stabilized. We don't hear about these awful knife attacks and such anymore because they've provided jobs for people and education and given people economic opportunity. The road to peace in the world is economic development. And that's why the synthetic left is so satanic, because they don't believe in economic development. They are opposed to economic development. They are Malthusians. They want to stop human progress because they say it's bad for the environment. They want to reduce the human population. They want to reduce consumption. They don't believe in development. And so, of course, they hate China. And they hate Russia. And they hate Nicaragua. And they hate Venezuela. Countries around the world are breaking out of the global capitalist system, the free market system, and asserting their right to economic development. And in response to that, the United States is engaging in violence and terrorism and instability. When the IMF or the World Bank goes into a country, they immediately demand free market policies, reduce the role of the government in the economy, cutbacks, and the result is the country's economy collapses and U.S. corporations move in. And this is the situation. Mexico has been growing its own food since long before Christopher Columbus ever showed up. But now in Mexico, as a result of U.S. policy, they're not producing their own food. They're importing their food from American agribusiness. The same for Haiti. There's been Haitian farmers, hundreds of years there's been Haitian farmers, but the United States went in there with NAFTA and the free trade agreement. Now they import all their food from American agribusiness. Right? This is how you keep countries poor. But China has a different policy. They go to countries and they do the opposite. Instead of demanding that the government, gut itself, instead of demanding total free market policies, they go there and they do the opposite. They build hospitals, they build schools, they loan the government's money to build new infrastructure, build new highways. And by doing that, they build up the economies of the countries they trade with. And that's why Bolivia, under Evo Morales, had the highest rate of GDP growth of any country in South America. The highest rate of GDP growth of any country in South America was under Evo Morales, the socialist government of Bolivia. They never tell you that. They never bothered to tell you that in American media, right? Because we could never talk about socialism working. But it was mainly because of the socialist government of Bolivia cooperating with, China. I went to Brazil and I saw the power plants in Brazil that were constructed by China. The government of Dilma Rousseff and the government of Lula da Silva cooperated with China, and they built hydroelectrical power plants all over Brazil. And people in regions of Brazil, in the rainforest and places in Brazil that didn't have access to electricity before, suddenly got access to electricity thanks to China cooperating with the government of Brazil. You can see this all over the world. Development, economic development is what China is all about. Raising people out of poverty, bringing electrification, bringing literacy, bringing access to healthcare. This is what China is doing. Development. The road to human liberation and peace is development. And the synthetic left does not believe in development. The synthetic left is determined to stop development. And it's utterly terrifying. But we've just seen a huge victory now with the government on Taiwan no longer being recognized by Nicaragua. This is a huge step forward. And you got to think about all the people who have died. You really have to think about it because we underestimate this kind of stuff. We really do. We don't seem to realize how serious these kinds of things are. But a lot of people have died. A lot of people have died. You think about the Sandinistas, the Sandinista Revolution, 1979. How many people died in that armed battle to overthrow a dictator and establish a socialist government? And how many people died in the 1980s in a civil war against U.S.-backed terrorists and thugs? And how many people died in the 1990s as the neoliberal free market regime in bed with Sun Myung Moon and the World Anti-Communist League and the government on Taiwan? How many people died as a result of their policies of dismantling socialism and keeping the country poor? So many sacrifices have been made. People died in 2018 during the attempted coup backed by the United States when the right wing tried to overthrow the Nicaraguan government. So many people have given their lives to get to this point today. So many people have made a decision. I am going to fight for something. I am going to resist I'm going to put my life on the line for socialism. So many people have done it. So many people have made very, very big sacrifices for the next generation. You have to think about that. You have to think about that. Because we here in the United States, we are spoon-fed the idea that there is nothing worth fighting for. There is nothing worth dying for. There is no hope. Human beings are just naturally evil. Martyrs, indeed. We are spoon-fed this ideology that says there is no real truth. We are spoon-fed this ideology that says there's no point in sacrificing anything. That is, if you look around our society, this is supposed to be freedom. This is supposed to be freedom. We're supposed to be so free because we have no ideology. Because there's nothing, we're told there's nothing worth dying for, nothing worth fighting for, nothing worth sacrificing for. We're supposed to be so free. So free. But you look around the U.S. society, people aren't happy. Look at the suicide rate in this country. Look at the suicide rate. Look at the drug addiction rate. You know, I must say, lately I've been spending a lot of time on social media. Unfortunately, it comes with the territory if you do this kind of work. If you're a journalist, if you're an online, personality, you got to do a lot of social media work. I encounter so many people who are so angry. They're so angry. So angry. So angry. And I have a feeling that they aren't really angry at me. They aren't really angry at, red browns. They're not really angry at tankies. They're not really angry at communists. They're not really angry about what I see on their social media. I think they're angry about something else. I think that they're angry about something else. I think beneath the performative anger, beneath the rage they've got at somebody they accuse of being racist, sexist, or homophobic, or defending a communist government or whatever, beneath it all, they're angry about something else. They're angry about the fact that this society has not given them decent economic opportunities. They're angry about the fact that they can't feel proud of who they are. They're angry about the fact that they feel disconnected from their family. They're angry about the fact that they don't have real friends and real social connections. They're angry about the fact that they don't feel love. There's so much rage, so much resentment, so much anger, so much pain. And that pain has a real source. It has a real source. It has a real source. And I can tell you how this kind of pain can be cured. I'm not saying this is a 100% solution that's going to solve all of your problems. Not saying that I'm going to guarantee you happiness for the rest of your life. Things won't go wrong. But I can give you a hint about how you can escape that pain. Now, it's interesting. I don't know if folks know this, but this is holiday season in the United States. And there's an organization that you'll see around this time of year. I actually haven't seen them, but I'm in New York City. You see them around this time of year. They ring the bells. They're the Salvation Army. They're ringing bells. They want you to donate to them. And a lot of people are saying you probably shouldn't donate to them because they have a record of not being good to LGBT folks, that's a reality. If you look at it, they're not so good to LGBT folks. They have a record of they're not as good as they make themselves out to be. Unfortunately, a lot of the charity work that they do is not given out to different communities that they don't like for political and religious reasons and such. A lot of people are saying don't support the Salvation Army. I think that makes perfect sense. But regardless, the Salvation Army, one of the founders of the Salvation Army back in the 1800s, he couldn't speak at their convention. They were going to have a convention. And he couldn't speak at it. He was so old and blind, he couldn't speak at it. Now, the story goes, this could just be an urban legend, but the story goes that he sent them a message. He decided to send a message to the convention of the Salvation Army when he was so old he couldn't possibly speak at it. So he sent them this message, and someone got up in front of the convention, banged the gavel, the story goes, opened the letter from the leader of the Salvation Army. I believe his name was General Booth, the great General Booth, founder of the Salvation Army. The letter that he read, it said, "Dear delegates of the Convention of the Salvation Army, others," signed General Booth. It was one word. It was a one-word message. Others. Others. And what was that about? Well, what motivated many of the people that were involved with the Salvation Army, at least back then, was a desire to help other people. Helping other people, connecting with other people, is a way to bring happiness. Connecting with other people, being involved with other people, is a way to find hope. And that was the point that he was trying to make in his letter. Others. And I got to tell you, if you're one of these people that's isolated, one of the scariest things is the notion that something could happen to you and no one would care. It's the worst feeling ever. The idea that the world is indifferent to your suffering. You could be suffering and no one would care. You would be screaming out in pain, and the rest of the world would just keep moving as if nothing would happen. That's a terrifying thought. That is a terrifying thought. But many people who feel isolated, they feel that that's already the case. They're lonely. They're hopeless. They're frustrated. They're angry at their family. They're angry at their life circumstances. They're unhappy with their situation in life. They're unhappy with the way people treat them. And no one cares. They feel like no one cares. They feel like they're all on their own. They feel like the world is just completely indifferent to their suffering. And that terrifies them. And that fills them with rage. It's the scariest thought, the idea that they could be suffering. And the world and everyone else could just be indifferent to how they're feeling. It's one of the worst feelings that they could ever experience. The idea that their suffering doesn't matter. The idea that their cries will be ignored. Just last week, I was here at my office, and we found out there was a man walking around outside the United Nations with a gun to his head. So I went with the camera crew over to the United Nations where there was, police, and there was a whole big incident. A whole big incident was happening where, the streets were shut down, and, and eventually the guy was arrested. We were there. We saw them with the sniper rifles. We thought maybe they'd shoot him, but they didn't shoot him. He was walking around the UN with a gun to his head, and they finally just, he dropped the gun. They arrested him, took him to the mental hospital. But that man, in order to do what he did, we don't know what his motivation was. He gave the police some kind of notebook. In order to do what he did, to walk around the United Nations with a firearm to his head, to pace around for hours with the police urging him to put his gun down, to risk, to do that, he must have been in such a huge amount of pain. Such a huge amount of pain. And what he was probably saying to the world, whether he knew it or not, it may have been, when people are that delusional and that psychotic, they would do something like that. They're not thinking clearly. But what part of him was probably trying to say to the world is, I am suffering. I am suffering, and no one hears me, and no one seems to care, and I'm all on my own. And that is the worst possible feeling. That's the worst possible feeling. It's the worst possible feeling. And there are so many people out there who feel that way. And especially around the holiday time, right? Because this is supposed to be the time when we're all happy. We're having a holly jolly Christmas or Hanukkah or Kwanzaa or New Year's or whatever you celebrate. People see those ads with families, around the Christmas tree, and they just feel lonely. And they feel that pain. They feel that loneliness, that hopelessness, and it drives them crazy. And I think that's what's behind a lot of the rage on the internet. Honestly, I do. I really do think that's what's behind a lot of the rage on the internet. These people, they're looking for somebody, just somebody they can vent that rage in. If they can find somebody that they can determine to be racist or sexist or homophobic, then all that rage that they have, it's okay. It feels righteous. Feels righteous to be able to dump your rage on somebody who's bad. And then that rage can come out, and you can pretend it's not about your loneliness. You can pretend it's not about your social isolation. You can pretend it's not about the fact that your family has turned its back on you. You can pretend that it's not about the fact that you don't have a job and you don't have the dignity of adulthood. You can pretend it's not about all of that. You can just get your rage out. You can get your rage out and feel like you're righteous and you are standing up for justice, but at the end of the day, there's something else going on there. Well, the cure for that, the only cure I know of, and again, not a fix-all solution, not a 100% solution, the cure for that kind of chronic isolation is connecting with other people. If you're a socialist, you're a Marxist, you're a communist, the worst thing for you is to be an internet Marxist, to be an internet communist. Just got to tell you that straight up. As much as I love you all being here, and you all are great, if all you ever do is listen to me online, it's not good for you. It's not good for you. Right? Because you're a communist, okay? You're not like a normal, average person. You're a communist. You're somebody who's come to the conclusion that the system we live under is wrong, that we need to overthrow the capitalist system. That's what you've discovered. You came to that conclusion. You're smart enough to see through all the bull honky, all the bullshit of this society. You're smart enough to see through it. So you are ahead of the game. You're probably more intelligent than other people. I got to tell you, communists tend to be high-achieving people, okay? And it always blows my mind. I've told you, that I used to work. There was somebody I was in a political party with who was a math genius. He was Moneyball before Moneyball, basically. He was no college degree or anything. He became the sports statistician for the New York Knicks. I told you I briefly worked with Leslie Feinberg, who was the first transgender activist in U.S. history, wrote Stone Butch Blues, wrote Stonewall Warriors, just a high-achieving person in every conceivable way. Communists tend to be people that are the cream of the crop. Typical average folks who are just kind of going along with the flow, unless there's some kind of revolutionary situation, unless society is entering a revolutionary crisis. For the most part, they don't endorse communism. But if you endorse communism in this society, you're ahead of the game. You're more intelligent than most folks are, I would say. You're more tuned in to how the world actually works. You have a greater depth of understanding, right? There's somebody in this chat, their grandfather was a mathematical genius, and he was also a communist. He gave me a biography of his grandfather, which I've been reading through. His grandfather was a mathematical genius, and not surprisingly, his grandfather was a communist. You talk about it. You go into these communist groups. You tend to find people who, they have a relative who went to Harvard, Einstein and Tanky, they have some amazing achievements in life. Biologists, award-winning writers. John Steinbeck was sympathetic to the Communist Party. He wrote The Grapes of Wrath, for goodness sakes. Albert Einstein, someone just mentioned him in the chat. Albert Einstein was, hugely sympathetic to the Communist Party. He wrote a beautiful essay called Why Socialism for Monthly Review magazine. Communists tend to be high-achieving people. But at the same time, they tend to be isolated from society. It's a very isolating feeling to know that the society around you is full of lies. It's lying to you about the history of the Soviet Union. It's lying to you about China. It's lying to you about its war on Syria. It's lying to you about the free market being the best system. It's lying to you to know that the society you live on is based on lies, to see so many people just walking along and agreeing with those lies. It's got to be a demoralizing, frustrating experience. It's got to be hugely demoralizing and frustrating. And if you just sit on the internet, saying what you think, arguing with what other people think, arguing with what other communists think in their little niche arguing about, who's wrong and who's right and who's this and who's... If you just do that, it's only going to feed your isolation. It's only going to feed your isolation. You're only going to be more hopeless. You're only going to be more angry. And it's going to become a downward spiral. The longer you're isolated, the more anxiety you're going to feel when it's finally time to meet other people. It's hard. It's a hard thing to do. To say, you know what, I'm not just going to be an online communist. I am going to go and meet people. I am going to go and be part of a community. It's hard to do because it's a risk. There's a voice in the back of your head that's probably saying, what if people don't like me? What if I don't get along with them? You're going to meet people that have a different position on many issues. You're going to meet people that have an analysis of a country that you don't agree with. You're going to meet people who like different aesthetics than you like. You are going to meet people who have a different culture, a different background than you, especially in the communist movement. Communists, you're going to meet Muslims. You're going to meet Jews. You're going to meet a lot of atheists. You're going to meet people of many different ethnic backgrounds. You're going to meet, Asian Americans. You're going to meet people of many, many different perspectives. Communism is an ideology that has deep roots all over the world in many different communities. And you're going to meet people that you might not have anything in common with. They didn't watch the same shows on TV that you watched when you were a kid. They maybe didn't even grow up speaking the same language that you spoke. They have different values than you. They have a different perspective than you, and it's going to be stressful. Right? Communism brings people together, if ever. All right. Perhaps we can chat about rural, urban. Pipeline, poverty zones. And it's going to be difficult. It's going to be very difficult. It's going to be scary. It's going to be frightening. frightening to meet new people, frightening to deal with people. And you know what? Those people are going to disappoint you at some points. They are going to disappoint you. They are going to let you down. They're going to do things that piss you off. They're going to disappoint you in some ways. Some of the people you're going to meet are going to have a different position than you on an issue you care so much about. You know, you are going to really like Mao, and they're going to say Mao was no good. They are going to think one thing about one issue, and you are going to think something different. But it's so much better than isolation. The road to happiness is others. The road to happiness is connecting with other people. Human beings have always been collective creatures. They've always been collective creatures. Since the time we were hunter-gatherers in the woods, all the way up to today, we've always been collective creatures. The scariest thing about the times we live in is the isolation. The isolation. What brings people together is ideas, is beliefs, is causes, is fighting for justice. The fact that so many people in Nicaragua were willing to lay their lives down to pave the way for what happened today shows you how powerful an idea can be. Ideas are very, very powerful. And if you can find a way to connect with people, to share a common cause with other people, to strive for something bigger than yourself alongside other people, you can experience a form of happiness. A form of happiness that is so rare in our society nowadays. You can find a rewarding feeling. I'm telling you that. If you want to remain on the internet, isolated, lonely, angry, I can't stop you. I mean, there are CPI reading groups popping up across the country like wildfire. Every day I get another email about another potential CPI reading group. Somebody in Portland, Oregon contacted me the other day. Somebody in Richmond, Virginia contacted me today. There are CPI reading groups popping up across the country because people don't want to just be online communists. There's all kinds of people that have stumbled into these live streams. Some of them aren't even communists. Some of them are libertarians. Some of them are whatever. But there's so many people that stumbled into these streams. They're like, I like this. I like this community. I like the values here. I like the optimism. I like the hope that is flowing through all of this. And I want to be part of it. You know? And that's what I'm trying to do. That is the entire purpose of these live streams. If I was trying to be the top YouTube commentator, I would make videos that looked something like what BreadTube did. I'd be dumping on chugs, or what is it, chuds? I'd be dunking on chuds, making fun of people, insulting people. That's not what I do here. I'm trying to build a community. And building a community means I may not have the biggest YouTube numbers, because that's not the goal. The goal here isn't to have huge YouTube numbers. I like having good numbers, I'll be honest. It makes me happy when I see those numbers get high and such, but that's not the goal here. And if that was my goal, I would act differently. My goal is to build a community. The Center for Political Innovation is a socialist community that is growing. The John Brown Volunteers is a socialist community that is growing. Students and Youth for a New America is a socialist community that is growing. It's centered around these ideas, but there's a wide amount of diversity within these organizations. A wide amount of diversity. I mean, you wouldn't believe how different the views of some people in the Center for Political Innovation are. There are people in the Center for Political Innovation who think one way, and there are people in the Center for Political Innovation who think another way. And that's okay, you know? I mean, we're trying to build a broad community of people who want to give their lives to this. We're trying to build a socialist community so that this isn't just an online habit, right? How can I get hooked up with a CPI book group, virtually or otherwise? Writing it down. That is the goal here. This is all about building a community. That is what we are trying to do. We are trying to build a community. And that's the goal here. And that's what changes the world. That's what the people of Nicaragua have been fighting for. That's what made China a global superpower. When people come together and share common goals, when people learn to live for the sake of others, when people learn to let some of their ego go, let some of their isolation go, when people learn to connect to other people, to feel that warmth that can only come from community, that's how the world changes. That's how the world changes. And that's my message to you all for tonight. That's my message to you all for tonight. Take it or leave it. And those are my opening remarks. So there you go. And now we'll have the roll call. Names and locations, names and locations. I will call you out as I see you. Names and locations, names and locations. Who's with us tonight? Names and locations. All right, we got Ash in Chicago. Very good. Ash in Chicago is with us. Who else? We got Shia from Montreal, Elias from Finland, Io, Hillary in New York City, Micah from Las Vegas, Jenny Lynn in Cincinnati, Leipzig, East Germany, Phil from Miami, Florida, Ben in Suffolk County, Arturo from Alaska, Gleb from Arcata, California, Carolyn in Staten Island, Tulare, California, Cincinnati, Ohio, Jenny Lynn, Edinburgh, Scotland, Scheme, Murhouse, Nate in Chicago, Springfield, Missouri, Camel Spider Attack, Sivert from Norway, Jeremy from New York, Quinn and Meredith in Washington State, Neil Frazier in Hong Kong, West Virginia, Don D in NYC, Tristan in Maryland, shout out to you, Don D as well, Deborah in Mazatlan, right? San Angelo, Texas, Char Darling, one of the John Brown volunteers. Shout out to the John Brown volunteers. Great folks. They should be the hero of everyone on this stream. Caitlin and CJ in Chicago. Dario from Brooklyn. Shout out to you, Dario. Ewoks Unhinged, a fellow YouTuber, Ewoks. Check out his channel. He's doing great stuff there. Mike in North Carolina. Steve, Southwest Michigan, Wisconsin. Joe Gale from Nassau County. Joe the Red. Shout out to you, Joe. You're a great, beloved member of this community. Mississippi, excellent opening. Jason Hunt in the Chicago, Smedley Butler. Alan from Utah. Liz in Boston. B-Level in Canada. Zach from Seattle. Good to be here, Caleb. Zachariah, St. David's, Bermuda. Greenville, South Carolina. Ben in Chicago. Mo in Toronto. Alan in Chicago. Jamie Gray from Texas. Jamie, I think you can be a mod. You just got modded, Jamie. John Tucson in Arizona, San Diego, California, John Whitty in Houston, Chicago, Illinois, Austin, Texas, Jose Gonzalez in Caracas, Venezuela. Shout out to you, Jose. All right, Appalachian Mountains, Bingham, New York, Florida, Auckland, New Zealand. Very, very, very good. Detroit, Anthony, right? Very, very good. Pittsburgh, Mohsen from Iran, San Jose, Northern Michigan, Galen in North Carolina, Quincy, Boulder, Colorado, Hodder in Iraq. There we go. There we go, folks. There we go. There we go. Now, before we get to the super chats, and keep the super chats rolling in. Oh, we got Benjamin from Florida. Very good. I'll keep calling people out as I see them. Before we get to the super chats, I do want to talk about something briefly. I don't want to talk about this too long, but I just want to mention this, okay? You know, and I don't know what the right thing to say about this is. I really just don't know what the right thing to say about it is, but we must be said, all right? There are some people who are out to destroy me. All right, and I'm not exaggerating there. I'm not, I know that sounds alarmist and that sounds paranoid and all of that. But you should see some of the things that are said about me. There was somebody on social media today who was tweeting out that I am a defender of the Confederacy. I am anything but that. All my lectures, I hail Karl Marx and his support for Lincoln. I mean, we ended the Saxton lectures singing the battle cry of freedom. But this person was announcing that I was a neo-Confederate and that I was a supporter of Ayn Rand. And as you all know, I have written some stuff against Ayn Rand over the years. Just a couple bit. In fact, some of it's been a little bit too over the top. But regardless, I'm not a supporter of Ayn Rand. I'm not a Confederate. But this person was announcing that I am. And they refused to change their mind. And it's not just that. There's people saying all kinds of stuff about me. And I mean, a lot of it has no truth in it whatsoever. Some of it, there's a grain of truth. They take something I've said and they completely blow it out of proportion. For example, I said I would work with people who are opposed to abortion and gay marriage despite disagreeing. I've had people tweeting at me, "You want to work with people who want to murder me, I'm gay." I'm like, no, I don't want to work with people who want to murder you. I want to work with people who might disagree with me and you about gay marriage. Like, what in the world? But this doesn't happen to most people, all right? You can be online, you can be a communist, this doesn't happen to you. I'm being targeted for a very specific reason, okay? And we need to just be frank about this. I am being targeted because I have gone to Nicaragua and been an election observer in Nicaragua. I am being targeted because I've gone to conferences in Iran, conferences that the U.S. government has since outlawed in Iran, and I participated in a humanitarian mission with the Islamic Republic of Iran and their Red Crescent Society trying to bring food to Yemen. I work for RT, a TV network from Russia. I've been to conferences in Russia. I've been to Venezuela. I have folks in Venezuela I talk to. I have worked with Chinese media before. I am being targeted because I'm an anti-imperialist, okay? I don't know which agency it is, which of the three-letter agencies, intel agencies it is, but one of these agencies has pegged me. They have pegged me, and they have said, this guy is tied to anti-imperialist states. We consider him to be a foreign asset or whatever. They've pegged me because of my anti-imperialism. They've pegged me, and they are trying to discredit me and destroy my reputation. And they are going to extreme lengths. I have never seen anything like it. They come up with one lie, and it's debunked, and they said, oh yeah, well that doesn't matter, and they come up with another one. And then 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 they come up with another one. And there are troll farms that are doing this. And you look at it, the same people that do this, the same accounts, they go after Gray Zone, they go after Mint Press. It's the same group of people, okay? And there's one individual, Alex Reed Ross. He's kind of the father of the red-brown conspiracy theory, a so-called anarchist from Portland. And Alex Reed Ross has been revealed that he's part of he's funded by a foundation that's directed by former leaders of the Department of Homeland Security, former NYPD officers. I mean, this is coming from the top. And what I really want people to understand is that at this point, if you're part of this community, and I hate to put it this way, I really do because it sounds extreme, but if you're part of this community, you need to make a decision. Because there's a lot of people who try to go either way, okay? There's a lot of people who try to say, well, a lot of what they say about Caleb's not true. Sure, he's not a neo-Confederate. Sure, he's not a homophobe. Sure, he's not a neo-Nazi Ku Klux Klan member. But, I don't agree with him about China. I don't agree with him about being a Christian. I don't agree with him about this. So there's truth on both sides. No, there's not. No, there's not. No, there's not. There is not truth on both sides. There is not truth on both sides. There's no gray area here. I am not a neo-Confederate. I am not a Holocaust denier. I am not a neo-Nazi. I am not a white supremacist, okay? And there's no truth on both sides about this. I am not what they claim I am, period, okay? And you can disagree with me, and you're welcome here. There's people all over this chat who don't agree with me about my religion, don't agree with me about environmentalism, don't agree with me about this and that. That's fine. You're welcome here. But if you are going to be part of this community, you need to throw down and say, look, what they're doing to Caleb is not right. they're lying about him, and I'm not going to go along with these lies. You need to do that. And I mean, you can't be honest with yourself. And we need to really, we can't change the people that are going after me. They're going to keep going after me. I'm talking to Haas. I can't change the people that are going after me. I can't. But our community, we need to be unequivocal. Thank you, Captain Waffles. We need to be unequivocal. About, what's going on against me right now is something that must be stopped, right? I mean, we have to stand up to this, right? Because it is relentless. And if I don't need people that sit there and go, well, there's truth on both sides. No, there's not truth on both sides. We can disagree about things, but there is clearly a campaign against me. And it's been going on for several years now. Thought Slime, Vosh, the Communist Party, some of the, people within the Communist Party have been pushing this. And it is relentless, and it is dishonest, and it is full of lies. And it is, and we have to come together as a community to repudiate this. We have to come together and say, okay, maybe Caleb and I don't agree on this, but you're against him. We have to just call this hate campaign what it is, okay? And we have to stand strong. And if we don't do that, we're not gonna, we got to get our own team together. Let them do their thing. Their team is fully united. These people, they just continue to make shit up and all that. Our team has to be united. We have to be fully united in resisting the smear campaign against me, the efforts to destroy me, right? We have to be fully united in it, right? And we have to be relentless in our efforts, our online efforts. We have to tweet about this. We have to write articles about this. We have to do everything we can to counter this. And if you're in a group of people, if you're at a socialist meetup or something, and someone starts in repeating some of this stuff, you have to get up and say, okay, I don't agree with Caleb about blank, but you're lying, and stop it. Stop it. And you know where this comes from. You know exactly where this comes from, right? This comes straight from the top, right? It's because he went to Iran. It's because he's been to Venezuela. It's because he was an election observer in Nicaragua. It's because he works for RT. And you have to just call it out for what it is. It's not fair criticism. It's not disagreement. It's a smear campaign. And they have lied over and over and over again. And those lies should immediately discredit this. Right? If they accidentally stumble onto something that might be half truth, that doesn't matter because they have lied over and over again. I mean, some of the stuff that these people say is so ridiculous, so over the top and ridiculous, so ridiculous that it should discredit them, right? I mean, if I got on here and said half the things that these kind of people were saying, if I got on here and said things that were anywhere near as inaccurate as what these people say, right? I've had people claim I lived in cities I've never lived in. I've had people, you wouldn't believe it. If I said half the stuff that these people say and was that inaccurate, I would be immediately discredited. But there's a lot of people that just want to keep going along with this, or they resist it until I say something you disagree with. And I'm warning you, folks. I don't know who you are. I don't know what your positions are. But at some point, we will disagree. You know that? There's going to be a time there's going to be a time when you and I disagree. There's going to be some issue that I take a position on that you're going to disagree with me about. I don't know what it's going to be. Could be climate change. I believe in climate change, but some of my friends and allies don't. Well, I think climate change is a reality. Now, I don't agree with the solution, but there might be somebody on here who does think that climate change is not real, and they're going to get angry, and you're going to get angry. There's going to be things that we don't see eye to eye on. And you have to be prepared for that. Because that's what my whole opening tirade was about. That's what the whole opening tirade was about the fact that we are going to disagree. And there are going to be times where you and I don't agree, and we can still be friends. I see people in the chat. I see people that are mods on here that disagree with me. That's fine, right? That's what's special about this community. Is we are learning to disagree with each other. We are learning to find unity. We're walking on a path together. We're learning together. We're studying together. We're struggling together. But we're going to disagree. We are going to disagree at times, and we have to be prepared for that, right? the value of what we're doing here is that there's going to be disagreement. So I am asking you all from the bottom of my heart to let's solidify our camp, right? Let's be clear about what is happening. There is a smear campaign against me that is very vicious and very dishonest and relentless and is motivated by stuff. And we have to be clear about this. We just have to be clear about what's going on here, right? And we need to be united against it, regardless of what disagreements we may have, regardless of whatever goes on. We need to solidify our ranks. We need to all be on the same team and say, this is wrong, right? Right? This is wrong. This is wrong. It's not coming from a good place. We need to call it out as it is. I need people to write articles about this. Someone should write an article for their Medium about what's been said about me and how dishonest it is. That would be awesome. You know, set up a medium.com and just take some of the common smears and just refute them, right? That would be great. You know, somebody needs to expose these accounts that are the source for a lot of this, right? Somebody needs to track these people. We need to start developing a way of documenting this. And we need to keep track of this, because this is how they work. There's an expression. It's a kind of a gross expression. They say if you throw enough crap at the wall, something will stick. Well, we need to document all the crap they throw at the wall that doesn't stick and show what their true aim is, right? You know, they're claiming I'm a neo-Confederate. Really, I'm a neo-Confederate, you know, but it didn't stick, and so it's just supposed to go away. Don't let it go away. Say, oh, really? You know, you're attacking him as this. You know. I mean, we need there to be a united effort against these smears. And honestly, if we can push back against this, we can turn the tide of the debate. Honestly, I really think we can. You know, Ewoks Unhinged is in the chat. Shout out to you, Ewoks. You know, the same thing started happening to him, and what was it based on? It was based on the fact that he, as a Canadian, and as someone who believes in the rights of Indigenous people and doesn't like the settler colonial history of Canadians, came up with the idea for instead of having Canada as it currently is, having a plurinational government in Canada, right? And so he made a flag for the plurinational, meaning multinational, right? Granting national autonomy to Indigenous people, the plurinational state of Canada, or the plurinational socialist Canadian Republic. And these people, immediately, they made that go viral, and they said he's a national socialist, right? Plurinational is the opposite of national. Plurinational means multinational. But because he made this flag, and because he's friendly to me, they made him go viral, and they went after him, calling him a national socialist. And when he made clear that he is not a national socialist, did they go, oh, we're so sorry? No, they just doubled down. And they said, well, okay, maybe that's not what you meant, but you're using the Canadian flag, and that's a settler flag. So these people never back down because it's paid work, right? Because they're not on it. They didn't just randomly see his account and see his flag and go, plurinational socialist, that's Nazi. It's not random, right? It's a hatchet job, right? It's a hatchet job. These are like mafia hitmen, right? They go after somebody until they go after their target until they kill them, right? That's how they work. And they went after Ewoks, you know, and called him a national socialist for advocating a plurinational state. You know, and that was just a lie. And then they didn't back down. And that's how it works with these people. They never go, oh, we're sorry, right? This person who called me a neo-Confederate, which I clearly am not, did he go, oh, I'm sorry. Oh, you're right. He does speak relentlessly about the importance of defeating the Confederacy and Karl Marx's role in that. No. They just, oh, well, you know, okay. Well, and they just move on to the next smear because they're paid hatchet men. That's why, right? They're working for some PR firm. It's contracted by somebody, you know, and there you go. And I just want to get that out of the way. You know, and I hate to talk about this stuff because they say that you shouldn't react to this kind of stuff, right? And the bigger we get, the more of this we're going to get. I'll just be real about this, right? A lot of these very isolated people, this is how they find, you know, solace, is by harassing people on the internet. So when sinister forces direct them at somebody, right? I mean, this is what they do. So just be aware of this, right? And we've got to be relentless, and we got to do what we're going to do. All right. So let's start answering our super chat questions. I just wrote down the last one about artists helping the revolution. Influences on Marx and Engels besides Hegel. That was from Chaya, and it's a very good question. Who were the influences on Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels other than Hegel, right? Hegel is the philosopher who developed the concept of the dialectic and historical progress. Karl Marx was considered to be a left Hegelian. It's the most blatant influence on Karl Marx is Hegel. But what other influences were there on Karl Marx? Well, many people have pointed out that one of the main reasons Karl Marx called his movement scientific socialism was because they were in an era where science was very highly valued, right? And that new things in the world were called scientific. And that there was, the official understanding is there was religious, utopian socialism, moralistic socialism, but they saw socialism as coming out of the class struggle. The fact they made a point of calling it scientific socialism is a testament to how much they were influenced by modernity and the Victorian era. So that's one fact. Now you can talk about the various socialists who came before Marx and Engels, right? That they talk about. They were definitely an influence. You can talk about Henry Saint-Simon. You can talk about Fourier? Was it Franz Fourier or Fourier? I forget what the first name was. You can talk about Robert Owen. They were all definitely an influence. Charles Fourier, thank you, Chaya. They were all definitely an influence on Marx, absolutely. And some of them developed an understanding of the concept of overproduction. You can find that in some of their writings. Now, they didn't understand it in the same scientific way Marx did, but they had some kind of understanding of, poverty creating, being created by abundance under capitalism. Now, what's interesting, in Europe, there had been a class struggle movement. You know about the Chartists in Britain. The Chartist movement was the first working class labor movement that ever developed, was the Chartists of Britain. They were definitely an influence. And that Marx was definitely influenced by the rhetoric of the labor movement. Someone else is talking about Feuerbach and, the German ideology. People talk also, for example, about some of the intellectuals of France. Paris was a hotbed of revolutionary intellectuals and thinkers. There were many, many figures within the Parisian revolutionary intelligentsia who had a big influence on Karl Marx. You can talk about Ferdinand Lassalle. You can talk about Louis Auguste Blanqui and the Blanqui current that was very big among the Paris communards. There was a huge amount of revolutionary, modernist, anti-capitalist thinking in Marx's time, and that was the ocean that Karl Marx swam in, right? And he consumed a lot of that. A lot of it was influenced by philosophy. And I've talked about how, salon culture, what we now call salon culture, was a big influence on Marxism, right? That coming out of the Industrial Revolution, in addition to the development of the industrial working class, you also had the development of the bourgeoisie. And you had a lot of wealthy people who didn't have to work, right? They were in a family of factory owners. And throughout the cafes of Paris, in Vienna, and in Berlin, and various places, you had people who wanted to be entertained, the idle rich. And that many of the trends that we now refer to as bohemian or middle class trends developed from the entertainment of the idle rich. We talk, for example, about Freud and Sigmund Freud, psychoanalysis. Well, Freud was largely going around entertaining rich people, people who were wealthy enough they didn't have to work. Would go and listen to Freud's lectures. They would go to Freud for psychoanalysis. That psychoanalysis originated as part of the salon culture, something the idle rich did to entertain themselves. Occultism was very much part of the salon culture. You talk about, mesmer, the term mesmerized comes from that, but, you talk about Aleister Crowley and all of that. That was a big part of salon culture as well. And that the revolutionary intelligentsia, the people that were interested in Marxism and communism or anarchism or whatever, was the same milieu often that where one could find occultists, where one could find psychoanalysts, etc. And I have argued that the influence of salon culture on Marxism is very negative. That salon culture is anti-populist. It appeals to the drive, the libidinal drive for destruction on the part of the revolutionary intelligentsia, and that in a lot of ways you could argue that the history of the 20th century was Marxism getting further and further away from the salon culture of Europe. The Russian Revolution was some distance from Europe, right? Lenin developed his party of new type. It was a highly disciplined organization. That was very different than the liberal democratic debating societies of the Second International. And then Stalin, when Stalin rose to power, and he developed the 5-year economic plans, and he put Lenin in the mausoleum. That was further distance of socialism from the European, the European salon culture. And now, the Chinese Revolution and Mao and the rise of Xi Jinping, that what we're seeing is that socialism started out as an idea discussed among the revolutionary intelligentsia in their salons, among rich people that wanted to change the world. Some were into the occult, some were into psychoanalysis, and some were into communism. It started out with Marx and his left Hegelians debating in their cafes. But then the Russian Revolution got it out of the cafes and among the broad masses of Russian people. And then the Russian Revolution led to the creation of the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union, became a society centered around these ideas. And then the Russian Revolution and the Soviet Union led to the Chinese Revolution. It led to various revolutions in Africa, the rise of African socialism in Ghana, the rise of Islamic socialism in Libya, Baathism. And that the story of our time, is really Marxism getting further and further away from the salon culture of Europe. That's really the story of our time. And it's a great story and a great development. I think Khadija can be a mod. You're a mod, Khadija. But there you go. That's really the story of our time. So that's kind of my rant about that. The Church Committee, the Congressional Church Committee, was something that happened in the late 70s. And it was kind of like Truth and Reconciliation for the 1960s political upsurge, right? So we know that starting in the late 50s, you had the rise of the civil rights movement in the United States. The civil rights movement eventually gave way to the Black liberation movement. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was eventually followed up with, the rise of Stokely Carmichael, who became Kwame Ture. Malcolm X was prominent in Black nationalism. And, by the mid-'60s, there was a racial uprising in the United States. Black people were tired of being oppressed. In the urban centers, there were rebellions against police brutality. The Civil Rights Act was passed, overturning Jim Crow in the South, and that there was, U.S. society was changing. And then, the Vietnam War was happening, and there were many people protesting the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War was wildly unpopular, but it continued. The U.S. government lied about the Vietnam War. Protests rocked the country. April 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was murdered, assassinated. Every major city in the United States had rebellions. If you then talk about the Democratic National Convention that happened that summer and how there were riots outside the convention. The students were protesting against the nomination of a pro-war candidate. You can talk about the murder of Fred Hampton and what happened at Columbia University. 1970, you had the Kent State Massacre where students were shot down at Kent State University protesting the Vietnam War, and then all the colleges throughout the country shut down. It was like a national strike. It was a huge political crisis that happened, and Richard Nixon came in and was kind of the Bonapartist figure who told the FBI to take the gloves off and go out and crush the Black Panthers, escalated the Vietnam War, and then when it became clear the United States couldn't win, did eventually pull out of the Vietnam War, and you had the political crisis of the late 1960s and early 70s, which was a period where it looked like some kind of armed revolution could break out. There were a lot of political bombings that happened. I believe there was something like an average of 2 to 3 political bombings a day during that time, right? And a lot of just random people who were, angry at the government were blowing things up. And you had, the Black Panthers and their armed patrols. You had the Weathermen street fighting, and it was a time of intense political turmoil. It was really a shift, right? U.S. society was transitioning was transitioning from the early Cold War McCarthyism to the late Cold War liberalism. And that it was a transition. I mean, the country changed, right? Things changed. The gay rights movement started in 1969. All kinds of things changed. So the Jimmy Carter presidency, right? Jimmy Carter was elected president. So Richard Nixon was president. He crushed the upsurge, kind of stabilized things. Then, he was forced to step down. Gerald Ford was president for a while. He was wildly unpopular. Nobody voted for him as president or vice president. But then Jimmy Carter was elected president. And Jimmy Carter was a Democrat. And Jimmy Carter was very much seen as, it was like truth and reconciliation, right? The war is over. The fight is over. He pardoned people who had gone to Canada to avoid the draft. And Jimmy Carter was going to bring the country back together. So part of what happened during the Carter presidency was they had the Congressional Church Committee. And the Congressional Church Committee was basically, it was a congressional committee that went over the crimes of the FBI and the CIA during the 1950s and 60s. They talked about COINTELPRO. They talked about MK Ultra and the CIA's drug experiments. And they investigated the crimes that the U.S. government had committed during that political upsurge. The murder of Fred Hampton was discussed, and it was a matter of public record, the Congressional Church Committee. And what's shocking to me is that, nowadays, if you tell people, hey, the U.S. government murdered a Black Panther named Fred Hampton, people roll their eyes. When I was in college, I'll never forget, I said, the U.S. government murdered Fred Hampton, and someone behind me said, oh, I bet that's fact. And I said, Google it. It's fact. But it was public record. It was widely discussed. But then after the Congressional Church Committee was over, it was kind of swept under the rug. But that was what the Congressional Church Committee was. The Church Committee was very much kind of, an attempt to admit that bad things had happened, show that the CIA and the FBI had done bad things, and move on. That was basically what it was. That was the idea. The idea was, let everyone know that we acknowledge these bad things happened. COINTELPRO happened. The murder of the Black Panthers happened. CIA did distribute drugs on college campuses. Yes, we spied on anti-war activists, and move on. And what's weird is that coming out of the Congressional Church Committee, the Socialist Workers' Party of the United States sued the FBI. All right, the SWP, the Trotskyites, took the FBI to court for violating their civil liberties. And they won quite a bit of money from the FBI, but it destroyed their organization. And that's an interesting history. But if you look at it now, the U.S. Socialist Workers' Party is irrelevant at this point. Barely any members. I mean, they sell books. They're a Pathfinder Press, basically. But they are pretty irrelevant. And suing the FBI, the lawsuit against the FBI, pretty much destroyed the Socialist Workers' Party. Another thing that happened, was... one of the congressmen who was involved with the Congressional Church Committee got killed at the Jonestown Massacre. I believe Congressman Leo Ryan was murdered at the Jonestown Massacre. So, it was a big development, but it was largely an attempt to try and stabilize the country, bring the country back together in the aftermath of the 1960s political upsurge. And it set the stage, the Carter presidency set the stage for the Reagan presidency, right? Anyway, enough about that. All right. Antonio Gramsci. Well, Antonio Gramsci was a Marxist leader in Italy, leader of the Italian Communist Party, who the fascist dictator Benito Mussolini put in prison. While he was in prison, he started writing largely about art and culture, and how culture is influenced by capitalism, how a cultural struggle can be waged. There was a critique of economic determinism. And the prison notebooks of Antonio Gramsci are widely studied. They're considered to be something that's very important to academics because it's talking specifically about art and about culture and about music and movies and how all of these things are heavily influenced by capitalism. That's Antonio Gramsci. He's a very important Marxist thinker, and a lot of people don't even know he was a communist. Because if you go to college, you'll inevitably be given, at some point, quotes from Gramsci. A lot of people have no idea he was even a communist. His prison notebooks were written in code. They were written in code because it was prison censors. If he was talking about class struggle and Marxism, Leninism, and they wouldn't allowed his letters to get out of the jail. So he had to write them in very carefully worded language. For example, when he refers to Marxism, he calls it the theory of praxis, Praxis, praxis. And the reason he does that is because he couldn't talk about Marxism. He talked about the theory of praxis. Nobody knew what that meant. Well, it's a code word for Marxism. And that's what Gramsci does. It's written in code. I've read different parts of the prison notebooks by Antonio Gramsci. Unfortunately, Gramsci was made into a big deal by the synthetic left. The Frankfurt School and the CIA, they used Gramsci as a way to push Marxism away from class struggle and push it into the cultural academic sphere, right? Herbert Marcuse, who was one of the main thinkers associated with the Frankfurt School, who was a U.S. State Department employee. You can look that up. He was a State Department employee, and his work was promoted by the CIA and their CIA magazine, Der Monat. He said that the working class won't make the revolution. It'll be intellectuals that'll make the revolution. Well, you know, Gramsci never said that, but Gramsci focused on intellectual struggles, right? Cultural issues, etc. So Gramsci's writings, were kind of popularized by the synthetic left as a way of trying to push Marxism in a different direction. You can talk about the rise of Euro-communism in the 1970s. You can talk about a lot of things that the idea they promoted Gramsci because he was so well loved. He was a leader of Italian communism who was basically martyred by the Italian fascists. He wrote these prison notebooks. He wrote these essays about how the bourgeoisie used culture to manipulate people. He did publish a critique of economic determinism, which is fair. I mean, there's something to be said about economic determinism. The idea that people simply act according to their economic interests. Well, you and I know that's not true, right? There's a lot of people who act completely contrary to their economic interests. That it is in their economic interest to believe in socialism, and there's a lot of very poor people who believe in capitalism, right? That often there are other factors that determine how people become revolutionary, and that just straight up economic determinism is not correct, that the cultural influences are important. This is Gramsci. I mean, Gramsci's worth studying, it's worth looking into, but unfortunately a lot of the reason that he has been so widely promoted is because he was used as a vehicle for separating the revolutionary Marxist movement, the labor movement, the socialist countries from the left-wing intellectuals. For example, Pete Buttigieg's father was the president of the International Gramsci Society, right? And was connected with, CIA manipulation of leftism, with the Congress for Cultural Freedom, with the Frankfurt School, etc. This was about building that gap. Now, that's not fair to Gramsci because that's not what he wrote. What he wrote is pretty good. But because he focused on cultural issues and because he did not use Marxist language, he's been useful to people that want to distort our movement. Russell Brand. What's Russell Brand been up to lately? Right, I remember after Occupy Wall Street, when Russell Brand started speaking up, he said he wanted to build a socialist egalitarian system. He was criticizing the wars. He had that show, what was it, The Trues. It's like the news if it was true. I don't know what he said lately. He's kind of all over the place. There's a mixture of kind of, Eastern mystical, like Buddhist ideas, right? That's part of it, but also kind of a Bernie Sanders socialist message. I haven't followed him lately. I was paying close attention to him when he first began speaking up as a leftist, but I haven't followed him lately. What is the latest development? Is there anyone in the chat who knows his latest development? What is the latest development with Russell Brand? What is his latest development? I don't know. I mean, what's he been up to lately? I haven't followed him lately. But I know when he started speaking up, it was in the aftermath of it was like a year after Occupy, maybe 2 years, 3 years after Occupy Wall Street. So yeah, I haven't followed his latest developments. I will say, at the time that he came out, he was this very famous actor speaking about socialism. And so, I wanted to write an article for a socialist newspaper, disagreeing with some of his ideas about what socialism was. He said that socialism is when you tax the rich, and I wanted to make the point, well, actually, no, socialism is when the banks, factories, and industries are organized to serve public good and not the profits of a few. So I wrote the proposal to the socialist newspaper of the socialist group I was in. And they told me I couldn't write the article. They wouldn't publish the article about Russell Brand because Russell Brand was a sexist. And I said, well, I'm disagreeing with him. It's a polemic against his ideas. So, we're criticizing him. Isn't that okay? And they said, yeah, but we don't want to promote a sexist, right? And I guess he had broken up with his girlfriend in a text message. They thought that was sexist, so I was not allowed to publish the article. And I was just thinking, are you kidding me? It was ridiculous. But at that point, they were looking for any excuse not to publish my stuff. They were very upset about all the international travel I was doing, all the TV interviews I was getting and such. And, it's sad. It's really sad. But I remember when that happened, it was weird. And I said, I'm disagreeing with him. So why does it matter that he's a sexist? I'm disagreeing with him. It was one of the weirdest things. And then the other thing is that and this blew my mind. And this is when I started to realize that I was on there was something going on. Is I remember one of the things I said about Russell Brand was that his definition of socialism was taxing the rich, and I said that's not what socialism is. And I had people in this communist group who said, well, it is. And I said, no, it's not, right? Progressive taxation is not socialism. And they said, yeah, but maybe that's how working people understand it. And I said, what? And I was blown away that there were these people that were in this tanky Marxist-Leninist party who were saying we shouldn't tell people socialism is not taxing the rich. And that blew my mind, And later, when the Bernie Sanders campaign of 2015, 2016 started going, I was really towards the end of my relationship with the Workers' World Party. I remember I wrote a polemic against Bernie Sanders, and I said, technically, he's not a social democrat, because a social democrat still believes that we should have a centrally planned, non-capitalist economy. They just want to get there gradually, and they support imperialism. One of the leaders of the group, no less, sent me an email saying that Bernie Sanders was a social democrat, citing Wikipedia. And I was just that blew my mind. I'm we don't even agree about what social democracy is, right? Social democracy, you're still wanting the workers to control the means of production. You just think it'll happen gradually. They don't have the Leninist critique of imperialism. But no. No. She cited Wikipedia, and she was the leader of the group. And to my credit, I just gave a whole rant about why it's important to be in groups. And, I really tried to be in that group. I had someone who attacked me the other day, and they said, oh, you make enemies. No, I stayed in the Workers' World Party for 8 years. 8 years I was in the Workers' World Party. Not 1 year, not 2 years, not 5 years, 8 years. And I didn't even try to leave, mind you. I tried to stay in the group and just keep my distance. I met my wife through the Workers' World Party. She was never a member, but I met her through the party. These people were like my family. I stayed in for 8 years. That's how loyal of a member I was. And then at the time that I was, they couldn't expel me because they didn't have the procedure, and I wasn't going to quit, but we just parted ways, I guess. I tried to not leave, right? And because the reason that I did that was because I believe so strongly in having a community. People say to me, I trust me, I put up with a lot of stuff in that organization that I did not agree with. I sat and when I was in the group, one thing that they did and is that, they recruited a bunch of people in North Carolina who weren't communists, right? There was this whole layer of people from North Carolina who were just woke. Wokeness wasn't as big then, wokeness was just kind of getting going, I guess. But there was a whole bunch of these people that weren't into communism. They were into Judith Butler, and they didn't know Lenin from a pipe organ. They were not interested in it. They just wanted to talk about gender oppression and they thought I was weird because I believed in communism. And they recruited a whole bunch of these people in North Carolina. And many times I would, get on, drive down to North Carolina with people, And I would sit through these conferences where there was not a single quote from Marx, not a single quote from Lenin, no talk of class struggle. It was all just, Republicans are racist, and I would sit there and we would do these dumb activities where we'd have like a squishy ball, and years I put up with this crap, okay? Seriously. So don't, people who say, oh, you just make enemies out of everybody. No, I don't actually. I brought people together with this community. I mean, and I was not even going to leave the group after 8 years of that. After 8 years of that, I was still willing to still be in the group. So, I am committed to being part of an organization. And I'm building the Center for Political Innovation now because a lot of people in the Workers' World Party felt the exact same way I felt. There were a lot of people in Detroit, a lot of young people in different parts of the country who were interested in communism for the same reason. But all the communist groups mysteriously get taken over by this woke crap. You immediately, they're taken over by somebody who doesn't really care about communism. But, I have my whole rant about movement managers. Sir, we're all going to talk about our favorite pizza. If you hear me clap once, if you hear me, Marxist groups inevitably get taken over by this non-communist, I don't know what you want to call it. Well, now I'm forming a communist group, Center for Political Innovation, not a party, a think tank, that will not be taken over by this crap. It won't be, right? We are forming a think tank, not a party. You can be part of the party and be part of it, right? I don't care if you're part of the CPUSA or the PCUSA or the RCP or the ISO or the QWH or the XYZ. I don't care. But we are going to build the Center for Political Innovation. We're going to have our reading groups. We're going to have our conferences. We're going to have our national gatherings. We're having a retreat this summer, like a week-long national gathering. And we are going to talk about socialism. We're going to have educationals. We're going to publish books. And we are never going to be taken over by this other thing. I don't know what you want to call this other thing, right? Postmodernism, NGOcialism, whatever it is. That thing will never take over this group, right? The Center for Political Innovation will remain an anti-imperialist group. It will remain a class struggle-oriented group. And we will never be taken over. Never will we be taken over, by whatever you want to call it. Never, 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 never. I am going to carve out a space, a socialist space that will be protected from this disgusting NGOcialism, because it's destroyed the movement, right? I mean, I'm sorry, any communist group you join now, inevitably, it's only a matter of time before you hear, if you hear me clap once, if you hear me clap twice, and then you're sitting in a circle and talking about your favorite pizza, and then somebody raises their hand and says, well, what about Marx and all of that? And they're like, yeah, sir, we don't quote the dead white men here, okay? So if you're going to quote like Karl Marx, maybe you should go join the Ku Klux Klan, because we're not into dead white men here, okay? We're more about like communities, and we're going to talk about why Republicans are racist, and I'm not doing that. Right? Now, Republicans are racist. Obviously, we can talk about that. But no, we are going to hold on to the ideology of Marx and Lenin and William Z. Foster and Gus Hall and China and the Soviet Union and Cuba and Bolivarianism. And I am not going to, there needs to be a space like this for the real Marxist ideology. No one believes in Marxism anymore. And we do. And the world does. In China, they believe in Marxism. In Nicaragua, they believe in Marxism. In Cuba, they believe in Marxism. But in the United States, all the left spaces have been infiltrated by this toxic poison. This toxic poison. And I'm going to build a space that isn't. The toxic poison will never take over the Center for Political Innovation. Right? The John Brown volunteers are watching, and they know that I'm a very tolerant guy. I let rule by consensus for the most part. But I will never, if somebody comes into the group and starts doing that woke stuff and starts, I will stop it. I will stop it. There will be a real communist space, and I'm going to do that. And I am committed to making it happen. Enough people watch these streams. My books sell enough. This community is growing, and we have the resources to do it. And we are putting our resources into building a real communist space that is not taken over by this toxic liberal, I don't know what you want to call it. And, I mean, I'm tired of it. I really am. I'm really tired of it. I'm really tired of the fact that communist spaces are run by people who don't believe in communism, and people that think that if you do believe in communism, that means, there's something wrong with you or something. We're not going to do that. We are going to resist. We are going to build our own anti-imperialist space dedicated to our ideas. And I'm going to do it. I am going to do it. Dems do racist policies better than Republicans. That's a question. Dems. All right, writing it down. All right, next question. Okay. Albert Einstein was a tankie. Yes, he was. Albert Einstein wrote an essay for Monthly Review magazine, which was a pro-Soviet Union, pro-China publication called Why Socialism. He wrote an essay, defending Russia during the Second World War, talking about the high achievements of Russia. He donated to the Communist Party USA's defense campaign when they were on trial in 1948 for the crime of being communists. Albert Einstein was extremely progressive, extremely sympathetic to communism. He was never a party member. He maintained his disagreements. But actually, Christopher Hitchens attacked Albert Einstein for the fact that he was, quote-unquote, an apologist for the Stalin regime. So yes, Albert Einstein was a tankie. So yes, all the people who hate tankies, they hate Albert Einstein. All right. Rural and urban solid pipeline poverty zones. I don't quite know what the person was getting at. But one thing we are doing with the John Brown Volunteers is moving them around the country. They're in Texas right now. They were in New York for a while. Pretty soon they're going to be in Chicago. We're moving them around to different communities. If there are people that are able to be full-time cadre, to give their time, their life and their time to building a revolutionary organization, they will be moved from different places. The John Brown Volunteers are so happy out there in Texas. Talk to them. They're having a great time. Now they've only been there for a little while, but, people will move. Not everyone can do that. And that's one thing about the Center for Political Innovation is there's different layers of participation, right? People can participate in their own way. We have a New York City reading group. We have different reading groups throughout the country. We have the John Brown Volunteer Corps. We're developing different ways people can participate. But yes, we do want to move people to areas where they can do work on the ground in communities that are impoverished and in communities they're not familiar with. The area that the John Brown Volunteers are in at this point is largely Latino. John Brown Volunteers are white, but they're working with local organizers on the ground, many of whom are Latino, who are allies of the CPI, who are from there, and they're doing great stuff, and part of being a revolutionary is getting out of your comfort zone. I remember when I was in Cleveland, I went to a college on the west side of Cleveland. It was like in a suburb on the west side of Cleveland. And every day after my classes were over, I got on the bus and I went to the east side of Cleveland to do political work. All the communist activism in Cleveland happened on the east side. And people would say things to me like, "Aren't you afraid you're going to get shot? Aren't you afraid you're going to get murdered?" And I would be like, "No, I'm not." But that's the racism, right? That's the racism. The suburbs of Cleveland are extremely racist, right? And, a lot of these white suburban kids were terrified to ever go to the east side of Cleveland, terrified to ever, ride the public transportation system of Cleveland. I'd never seen anything like it, but for me, fine, I took the train, took the MTA, no problem. No problem, and I don't know why people have that attitude, right? Because, there are murders that happen. There's crime that happens, but Cleveland at that point had a very low crime rate, and it was racism. It was just blatant racism, right? And that's part of how the ruling class keeps people divided, is this racism, I guess you could call it. And I had no problem getting on the bus, and people were just shocked that I would do that. And it was really sad. It was very, very sad. But there you go. All right. How can I get hooked up with a CPI book group? Well, the first thing to do would be to sign up on the website. So go to cpiusa.org and sign up. From there, you should get invited to our Saturday Zoom calls. You'll be sent the link to our Saturday Zoom calls. Every Saturday, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Pacific time, we have our Saturday Zoom call. You'll have the link at that point sent to you. You can join those those calls, and from there we can connect you to a reading group. Now, there's a Chicago reading group. If you're in the Chicago area, I think you can just sign up on the website at this point. I think if you're in the Washington, D.C. area, the Students and Youth for a New America Club, you can directly get in contact with them. But yeah, the first step is signing up on the website, and then from there we'll be able to connect you. So there you go. All right. Talking to Haas. He hasn't reached out to me, but I'd be happy to talk to him. I've talked to him before. We've done streams together, so if he's wanting to have me on, that'll be fine. We just have to find a time that works for both of us. So if I hear from Haas soon, that would be great. All right. What can artists do to help the revolution? Think about your art. There's a chapter in Mao's Little Red Book about art and culture. It talks about how, art, there is no such thing as apolitical art or art for art's sake. No such thing exists. All art has a political message and a political purpose. And as an artist, you have a responsibility to use your art to advance progressive forces in the world. So as an artist, think about the impact your art is having. I think that's the first step. Try to find art that pushes forward a progressive political message, or at least empowers people, makes people feel good about themselves. There's a rant by Woody Guthrie about different types of songs. You can look it up about the songs, the songs that he writes and what he did with his songs. Check out that rant by Woody Guthrie about the types of songs he believed in. There you go. All righty. Should left opportunism be called out? I'm all for polemics. Left opportunism, right opportunism. Yes, people can disagree. It's an important thing. It's the important thing in the history of our movement. I wrote a whole book about BreadTube, and all these idiots were at me like, oh, what an idiot. He wrote a book about it. It's like, I'm a socialist writing a book about other socialists. More people listen to BreadTube than listen to any communist group in the United States. They get hundreds of thousands of views on their videos, and they're wrong about socialism. Why would a socialist not write a book about BreadTube? Anyone who knows anything about the history of our movement knows that we write books about each other. And we compare our socialist ideas to other socialists. That's one of the most common things that socialists do, is write polemics, right? It's one of the most common things in the history of our movement. So yes, if there's somebody who has a political line of left opportunism, right opportunism, and I think there is a way of calling them out. Now, I think we should have unity in our movement. I think we should try to be honest, right? We shouldn't just hurl insults at people, but we should, if we see something we disagree with, it's okay to step up and say, you're wrong on this point, you're wrong on that point. I think it's fine, right? Principled disagreements, that's how people learn. That's the dialectic, the back and forth. So there you go. Do Democrats do racist policies better than Republicans? They do them with less resistance, right? When Republicans do racist policies, there's protest and mobilization by the left against it. When Democrats do racist policies, the movement shuts up about it, right? Ronald Reagan was all about, he had this myth of the welfare queen, and he just, got rid of the U.S. welfare state. But he wasn't able to do as much as Bill Clinton did, because in response to Ronald Reagan, there were all kinds of mobilizations and protests by the left. When Bill Clinton got rid of welfare as we know it, the left was largely silent. There was some resistance, but for the most part, the left was silent because a Democrat did it. When Donald Trump had kids in cages at the border, horrendous policy, there was widespread outrage and protest. The exact same policy is in effect under Joe Biden, but now it's not kids in cages, it's children in facilities, and we all go along with it. Now, there's been a reduction in deportations under Biden. That has happened, okay. But it's standard, right? Standard, right? That, yes, when Democrats do bad policies, there's not as much resistance. That doesn't mean that Republicans tend to do them with a much more gleeful, nasty tone. Republicans are trying to build a hateful right-wing movement while they do their policies, right? Mass incarceration, for example. The Democrats, it was Bill Clinton's administration and Democrats around the country in California and elsewhere who presided over a big expansion of the prison industrial complex in the United States. But the tone from Republicans was very different. Right? The tone of the Republicans was, lock them up. There was the infamous Willie Horton ad. Do you remember the Willie Horton ad? It was an advertisement about, some criminal who'd gotten out of jail and committed another crime or something. Democrats try to pretend they're sympathetic to people of color while they pass problematic policies. Republicans tend to be trying to build a right-wing racist movement while they commit these atrocities. They're trying to build a right-wing racist movement, so they are much more in your face and bold about it. But at the end of the day, I mean, the ruling class is the ruling class. American capitalism is American capitalism. And that's how these things work. So there you go. All right, folks, I think this is where this live stream ends because I'm out of Super Chat questions to answer. Hopefully we'll have another live either tomorrow or over the weekend, but I'll be back soon. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Good night.